Almost every hacker that you speak to has some sort of a subdomain or a domain or an application that they use for their day-to-day bug bounty hunting. And it's not really the application itself that they use, it's just mostly the domain to structure all their bug bounty data. And then they also host files on there that helps them be more efficient when it comes down to bug bounty hunting. I know this may not make a lot of sense, but trust me, throughout this video, I'm going to explain what I mean. And hopefully by the end of the video, it makes a lot more sense to you, and you also get to create your own box by following this video. So let's jump into it. The first thing you want to do is just create your own box. You can do that with anybody that you want to partner with. I use DigitalOcean, but you can use any other company. You can do Amazon, you can do Google, you can do whatever platform that you prefer. I personally do DigitalOcean. It's just easier. That's what I've been used to. And if you want to, this is not a partner video, but I do have a referral link down below. It gives you $200 and I get also paid in case you do sign up with a paid service. Just so you can see on the screen, we're looking at these different options. I usually do an Ubuntu box and I go with the basic. Honestly, you don't have to spend a lot of money. So if you don't want to go with one of the most expensive packages, I will just settle for the $6 or $12 a month. Depends on your budget. Honestly, $6 to $12 could go a long way, but you can just set this up as a vanilla box like itself here. If you know how to set up Apache, MySQL, and PHP on your own, then you're set. You can do it on your own. I'm not going to cover that here, but if you don't, then you also have the marketplace. You can do something like LAMP, which is Linux with Apache, MySQL, and PHP. You can install it, log in, and it has everything set up, but you still have to do everything manually. That includes issuing the cert and things like that. So if your background is in some of this stuff, you know how to do it, please take the time to do it manually. It's a lot, it's a lot beneficial for you to do it on your own. But if you don't know how to do it on your own, don't worry, I got you. One of the things that I have started to use just because I want to speed up the process is using Cloud Panel. I think it's called Cloud Panel tool right here. You can install this on any of these machines as well. Honestly, it is one of the easiest ways to set up a box without having to do everything manually. It also uses Let's Encrypt to issue an SSL cert to your domain. You will need that for your hunting later. I will talk about that in just a bit, but it just makes everything easier. The point of doing these things and these tasks isn't to become one of these lead hackers that does everything manually. The point of doing hacking and bug bounties is mostly to be efficient. So if it means that you are not comfortable enough to do this on your own, or if you don't have the time to do it and you don't have the efforts and the energy to do it, this is also something that you can do. So install Cloud Panel 2, select your box and launch it and give it a few minutes. And when it's done, it's going to give you an IP address and you can go through and set up your username and password to log into. So let's take a look at this box really quickly. This is the IP address. It's been given by DigitalOcean. You're going to set up your name. I'm going to put Ben Nahamsec, username Nahamsec, and then we're going to give it an email. hello@nahamsec.com. We're going to give it some password. This is not going to be my box I'm going to always use. The time zone does make a difference. Make sure you set it to your local time. So in case something fires later, when we talk about some of these different vulnerability types, it makes sense to you and the timeline actually matches up. So I'm going to create this user really quickly. And hopefully we get to log into our box and show you how it works. Before we do this though, there are a couple of things that you need to have. You need to have your own domain. So on this screen, you can see I have a domain with Google domains. Obviously, you can use any other registrar you want. This is where I've used some of my domains. And I have this domain called hackwithnahamsec.com. And I've created an A record. And honestly, this is pretty standard for any other platforms you use to register your domain. Right here, I am creating an A record and I am pointing it to the IP address of our box. And later in a couple of seconds, I'm going to show you how to set that up. But we're going to go over here and log in. Let me make sure I have the password right. There we go. And now we can add our first site. So I'm using YT as my record. It could be your www record if you want to do it. Maybe you want to use your domain that has your blog on there. So if you want to use www for something else, you can always create a subdomain and create this website right here and point it. So you can either do something like a static HTML site, you can do Python, you can do just a PHP site. I prefer to do PHP because a lot of the things that I create are actually in PHP. And what we're going to do here is we're going to give it our domain and we're going to say it's yt.hackwithnahamsec.com. And it's going to ask for a site user. So we're just going to call it YT hack with Nahamsec like this. It's going to give us a password. And honestly, you can use this password to log into specifically this user. But I run things on root sometimes and I don't need this, but it helps to have it. So we're going to create our website. Again, I know a lot of people are going to want to tell me about the security hygiene. I have my SSH key logged into most of my personal boxes. So if you want to log into my box, you're not going to be able to log into it as root unless you have my SSH key. So I'm not really worried about running things as root, but best practice is not to run it as root, but YOLO, I'm just going to do what I like to do. And I'm not really worried about it when it doesn't really have any sensitive data. But now we have created our website. And if we go to this domain, because we have created this record already, looks like I have the wrong IP address, but we have created this record already. I'm just going to point it to the right IP address. And if we go back to it in a few minutes, it's going to start loading that site for us. But what we want to do, and it's very crucial here, is we also want to have a TLS or SSL cert attached to this, and we can have it self-signed by just using Let's Encrypt using this panel, this cloud panel. And all we have to do is just create and install it. So hopefully if the DNS record has been put in place, it is going to actually create that SSL cert, issue it for us. And now we have a domain with HTTPS on there that could be very, very beneficial when it comes down to looking for vulnerabilities. And I will explain all that later down the video, but I just want to make sure we get this done. And now that we have finished installing and doing Let's Encrypt, we're going to go to our website, and as you can see, we have our domain, and it is actually HTTPS. And the reason why this is important is a lot of times when you're doing your bug hunting and you're pointing a application to a third-party site, a lot of times they require to have HTTPS on there. So if, for example, you are looking for SSRF, a lot of times HTTP with an IP address doesn't cut it anymore, and you want to have this domain in place. Speaking of SSRFs, let's talk about one of the first vulnerabilities that we want to take a look at. A lot of times you will see that hackers are looking for SSRFs and they want to create different DNS records that you're going to need in order to test for SSRFs. So if you are familiar with SSRF, a lot of times hackers look for the AWS metadata, and sometimes that IP address, that string of 169.254.169.254, a lot of times that could be blocked by directly typing in the IP address. So what happens is people like myself and a lot of the hackers, what they do is they actually create another record. So for example, here we're going to create another one, and we're going to say, hey, I want to create one that's called AWS, for example, and I want to create that to point to 169.254.169.254. And now from now on, every time I want to reach to that IP address, if it is blocked or even if it isn't blocked, by default, instead of giving it the IP address, I'm going to give it this DNS record. So on the DNS level of the domain, what I do specifically is I have a bunch of different records under that domain. You can call them a subdomain, sometimes it's a CNAME, sometimes it's an A record that point to different things. One of them being this metadata IP address. The other one that is very, very common that you want to create as an A record is you want to create one. Let's just one more time, 169.254.169.254. Also, this is very helpful in CTFs. I know a lot of CTF players that use this trick, but the next one we want to do is we want to create one that points to a local host. And I name them very obvious in this way because it's just easier to remember. So I know localhost.hackwithnahamsec, for example, is going to point to 127.0.1. So that is also one of the things that I have done. I've also gone as far as separating some of my systems. So for example, if I have a XSS Hunter ran somewhere, I'm going to create an XSS Hunter subdomain and I'm going to point it to the IP address. Maybe it's hosted on the same box, but I have the domains separated just for that reason. It just makes it easier to just navigate through the different applications and the different things that you're hosting. So those are just examples of things you can do on the DNS level. The first thing is you want to make your domain. You want to point it to your box using Cloud Panel, or you can do it manually on your own. Then you want to create these different DNS entries. Those are the most common ones with AWS, or it doesn't have to be AWS. It could just be called metadata, and then the local host. And then there's some other ones that you can point to. You can maybe point it to other hosts that you know and it's going to be important to you. Sometimes I even go as far as pointing them to a local IP address like 10 dot something something something. It's just to have them. And there are services out there that you can use, but I've learned that a lot of times firewalls or web application firewalls actually block those strings. So it's just easier to have your own system in place by creating the system that I've showed you so far. So we talked about the DNS level of things, but now let's talk about the web server. We just created this server. Now it's time to organize what this server looks like. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually SSH into it really quickly. First thing I want to do is I want to just change this host name, and we can just call this YT for now. And then we're going to reset. Now we're going to set up our box. So the first thing we want to do is we want to talk about the structure of how we organize our data after we perform recon. So I'm not going to show you how to install any of the tools. Those are really, really easy. I have an old video on YouTube you can watch, but it's very important for us to have a way to organize the data that we're going to output from these tools and keep an archive of them. So for example, I always have a folder under my home directory that's going to be called our, and it's going to be called our recon folder. Instead of recon, I'm going to have my targets broken. So this could be broken down in a number of different ways. What I want to do is usually it's just based on the targets that I'm hacking on. So if I'm hacking on, for example, Red Bull is going to have its own folder. And then the next one, we're going to probably create a program. For example, let's try and do something for IBM. So those are the two programs that we're going to hack on. I have created these and they're going to be in there. What we're going to go into Red Bull now is we want to create a domains list. We're going to create domains.txt. This is the list of domains that are owned by that specific company. So what we're going to do is we're going to type in our domains name. So it's going to be redbull.com. Maybe it's redbullmedia.com. I think like this is another domain. And we want to save that. This is how I organize it. This way I don't have to keep track of all the domains that I want. You can put them onto a folder, and we're going to do the same thing with IBM. Also, feel free to shame me in the comments for using Nano and not Vim, but it is what it is. I'm going to use Nano to make it easier. Again, I'm mostly about being efficient than being elite or being top notch at what I do. It's just being more efficient and using these tools. So we're going to, for this one, put ibm.com. We're going to put redhat.com, and then we're going to save this. Now we have our list of domains. The reason why I organize my assets like this is because if I need to read all the domains, for example, all I have to do is go into my home directory. So we have our recon, and I can just go cat recon domains, and that gives me a list of all the domains, and I can actually feed that into another tool. So I can maybe do something like xargs and feed it into my next tool. For example, I can do subfinder, and it will just do my reconnaissance as an example of it. But also what I want to do is I also have an output file for every target. So for example, if I do run subfinder on one of these domains, so what we're going to do is we're going to go to our Red Bull, and we're going to go to our recon and then Red Bull. And anytime that we run subfinder, so for example, I'm doing subfinder IL, we're going to give it domains.txt. We're going to have it output to output.txt. And honestly, it is the easiest way to do this. It's just we want to have them standardized for all of your different outputs. So this way, if you're looking for something specific, you can again go back and do a cat recon all of your targets output.txt and be able to maybe grab for a specific keyword. Maybe, for example, a new Jenkins CVE comes out and you want to look for it, you can look for the keyword Jenkins. Same thing if you learn HTTPX, we want to create that into a HTTPX output. So let's say if I run HTTPX on one of these domains, let me just do this one more time. Let's say I've ran this and now I want to do HTTPX. I'm going to do all of my different tags that I want to do. So for example, I do title, I do port, 443 and 8080, for example. I'll have it output to httpx.output.txt. So now the different tools are always going to be named tool-output.txt. That's personally something that I've just created as a standard for myself. It just makes it easier to be able to track everything across the number of different programs. If you want to hear more about just this logic in specific, drop me a comment about data organization and I will make a video on it. I just don't want to spend too much time on it. It's just supposed to cover the basics of how to organize your box and what are the different things that go into it. So just keep in mind, if you want to be successful and you want to be organized with your data, what you want to do is you want to make sure all the files are named in a standard format, which is applicable to all the different targets. So it's easier to just go through a number of different files and find a specific thing across a bunch of different targets. So that just comes with the data organization. But on the server end, we have the data, but we also have our web server. Earlier in our example, I talked about creating this website. And if we go to our home directory, we go to our username that we just created. We can go to our HTTP docs. It's going to take us to this domain. We have our index.php. That's the only file we have on there, but we created this web server not just to put our recon data on it, but the purpose is to have some files on here as well. So one of the things that I personally like to do a lot of times with these boxes is having a few HTML and PHP files. The first one being that I like to have just the xss.html. This is just for me to have something that has maybe a script, alert script, or sometimes it could have something like an image. You can have both. X on error equals alert. I have that in case sometimes I want to feed it to an application when it requires some HTML file, for example. Maybe you can upload a file from another server. I also have an XSS.js. This is not, oh, let's say one more time. This is not your blind XSS. This is just having a XSS file on there. I have things like having an alert in there, just in case I wanted to include a script from an external source just to see if it works. We can do other things in here. You can add an open redirect. You can have it do something like a window location also, but those are just the different things you can do. I like to just keep it simple, but I want to kind of note the different files that you need to have to get started. So this is another one that I have. It's just xss.js, because sometimes I want to go on a web page and just type in script, src, mysite.com, and then xss.js, and see if it reaches out to it. So the other ones that I'd like to do is having a few redirect pages, and I'll explain what I mean. The first one is an ssrf.php. Sometimes you're going to have a XSRF, for example, that allows you to do an iframe and you want to redirect it. If you don't understand these, please go look at SSRF videos. I've created a bunch of those, do some labs. But if you are familiar with SSRF, there's going to be times where you want to be able to point your iframe and have it actually refresh the page and point it to another web page. And a lot of times that is, again, the metadata. So I would create something like this where it does a header location change and it sends it to this IP address. That has been one that I've always had. I'm going to put that in there. But also you can do something different. You can actually create one that just takes a URL parameter and just goes to whatever parameter you give it. The next one that we're going to create is something for an XXC. So if you're ever texting for XXC, you want to have something right here. I always have these on default. A lot of these times the system file here changes. Sometimes I have it reach back out to my server, but something to have by default. Again, you can create multiple of these. It's something for XXC. It's just easier to have these loaded sometimes. A lot of times when I'm at an event and I may not travel with my hacking laptop, I may have my work laptop on me, it's easy to have these. But also a lot of times, again, you're not required to upload files. You have to fetch them from a third party, and just having these, it's just easier. So that's another one that I create. It's just your xxc.xml. A lot of times they're actually available on payload, all the things right here. You can grab some of these payloads. For example, if there is an SSRF, let's look at it really quickly. Maybe nothing, but I know there is some for XXC. So for example, if you're looking for XXC, you can go to XXC injection right here, and you have a bunch of different examples for it. You can look at them, create them based on your own needs, and then put them on your server. So these are a couple of them. So what I would recommend is having different ones for 301, 302, and 303. Sometimes each application acts differently depending on the response code that it's looking at. So I recommend having those. It all depends on the vulnerability. So a lot of times on my box, what you will see me have is having a 301, 302, 302.php, right? And also having one that's called redir.php that just takes a URL parameter and then allows you to assign whatever URL you wanted to redirect you back to. So those are the things that you want to do. There's a lot of different ways you can do them. There's a bunch of resources on php.net itself, or you can just use ChatGPT to create those. But keep that in mind that those are also things that you can create. Again, everything that you put on this box is a lot of personal preference and how you hack and the different tools that you rely on. But those are just the basics of things that I have seen that's common amongst a lot of bug bounty hunters. So that's what I would do if I were to just create my own box and from brand new, starting from scratch. This is what I would organize it with. I would create a web server first, then I would create all these different files that I need. Again, those files could change depending on your style of hacking and the vulns that you actually focus on. And then what I would do is create an organization system that works for me. But always, always, always what I would do is I'll make sure that it's standard across all the bug bounty platforms and all the different bug bounty programs that I hack on, just in case I want to go after something in mass. So always make sure your outputs for each of your tools are the same format and you have a folder per target, so you can always just navigate through them and find different vulnerabilities. Then I would go and create stuff on the DNS level. So set up stuff for your blind XSS, for example, and also create some DNS entries that point to internal resources just in case you need them for an SSRF or some server-side vulnerability. All right, that's it. I hope this video helped. Let me know if you like this video, if you want me to make more content like this. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, turn on your notification bell, and I will see you all in next week's video. Peace.